Joining us now from Tel Aviv is international affairs expert Tom Gross. We'll be discussing the latest from the US elections. Good afternoon, Tom. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Good afternoon.
Now, the polls suggest the race is still exceptionally close and more than 75 million people have already voted. How might these close poll results influence the campaign strategies of both candidates?
Well, I mean, they're going for the 7 so-called swing states. They're spending a lot of time there with last-minute, round-the-clock rallies. Look, it's amazing how close this is. I don't think there's been an American election where the polls were quite so close. In several states, it is literally to a decimal point, percentage point, neck and neck. And it's quite surprising, really, because the two candidates are very, very different. Often you have similarities, but in this case, there's a stark difference in character between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And of course, it might be so close that we don't know the result the day after. There may be all kinds of challenges, legal and other challenges.
Okay, so you mentioned the critical 7 swing states, which could determine the election outcome, and the competition is even tighter. So what role, let's hone in on that a little bit more, what role might the undecided or swing voters play in potentially shifting the results in either candidate's favour?
Well, I suspect the undecided voters are not happy with either candidate. Look, Donald Trump, after he disputed the last election, the so-called January 6 riots, a lot of people think, he should not serve again. On the other hand, Kamala Harris is really rather a poor candidate. She hasn't revealed properly her policies. She doesn't finish thoughts and sentences. She has these so-called word salads. A lot of people think she was basically anointed because it looked in the summer that Biden would definitely lose. So the Democrats sort of hastily pushed her in, just like they did 4 years ago as vice president when they wanted to offset Joe Biden, who was an elderly white man, with a younger person of color, so to speak, female. And she wasn't really chosen because she was very popular then. And there's a reason that she didn't get any delegates when she stood 4 years ago, as we see now, because she's a disappointing candidate. So it makes it very hard for undecided voters, and they're probably just going on which candidate they like least decision.
So in that case, if many undecided voters, as you said, and it's highly unlikely that they will be very confident about which way to go because of, there's a very short amount of time left now. What are some of the strengths that will help the voters that are more decisive, if you like? Who do you think looks like the favourite at this stage?
Well, if we go back to the summer when Biden was kind of forced out by his own party, he was regarded as essentially too old and maybe not quite 100% fit all day long. So Trump was putting ahead. Harris was then brought in, and there was a lot of enthusiasm initially, but as the campaign has gone on since the summer, she has not presented enough policy detail. Trump at least has a grasp over policy, whether one likes it or not. He can stand for 3 hours and speak off the top of his head in some detail. Harris doesn't. And in fact, the Democrats have resorted to what I think is a mistake, which is to basically smear the voters. They called them garbage and Nazis, fascists, and deplorables and whatever. And it's not the way to endear yourself with centrist voters to basically try and to say you're going to be a racist if people can make up their own mind. So I think they made a mistake. On the other hand, many people are afraid of Trump's sometimes authoritarian tendencies. But look, it is too close to call. I know that's a cliche, but in this case it really is too close to call.
Okay. All right, now speaking of policy, let's look at foreign policy. When Americans choose between the two candidates, the decision will mark one of the most consequential elections for US foreign policy in generations. That could ripple out into conflicts and redraw alliances around the world. How how will the election affect US foreign policy?
Well, I think it could affect it greatly. Look, it's something ironic. All of us in the world have to, we all have a stake in this election, even if we don't have a vote. Again, Trump, whatever one thinks of him, does have a grasp on foreign policy issues. Like I noticed in the debate, he mentioned the Houthis, and I'm not sure Kamala Harris quite knew who they were. She's a bit of a lightweight. So, but going back to Trump for a second, some people think that if he's elected, he will continue the foreign policy that he had in his first term, where he was fairly pro-Israel, but on the other hand, he managed to get the so-called Abraham Accords for peace agreements or normalization agreements between Israel and Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and to a lesser extent, Sudan. However, there are now many isolationists in the Republican Party. They're given voice by people like Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard. So it's not clear that if Trump's re-elected, he will necessarily have the same kind of foreign policy as his first term. He's also very much running on a no more war policy, which has repercussions also for Ukraine. He may cut off funding for Ukraine in the middle of its war with Russia. On the other hand, because he speaks tough, I think a lot of other governments are quite frightened of him. The Russians and the Iranians are a bit frightened of Trump because even though he might not declare war, he may use some very big, strong weapon against them. And I think, there's a lot of unpredictability. Harris, on the other hand, is more predictable in the sense that, she'll probably be a continuation up to a point of Biden's foreign policy. Having said that, she is a little bit to the left of Biden. She may be tougher on Israel than Biden's been. She may also wind down support for Ukraine. So there could be differences, but I think mainly with Harris, she'll very much be in the, she's malleable. She'll be in her advisor will very much control foreign policy. I don't mean to be unfair to her, but I've examined very, very closely everything she said. I don't think she has much of a grasp on foreign policy, so it will very much be others who will be running it.
Okay, one last question here, Tom. We all know about the unprecedented event that we all witnessed on the January 6th. On the 6th of January, the riots on Capitol Hill when Trump lost the election last time. What's the feeling on the ground amongst Americans in terms of a scenario where, should Trump lose again, are they fearful of a repeat and perhaps something similar on a larger scale? And what security measures do we know of that are being taken in Washington leading up to the elections this time round?
Yes, not just in Washington, in other locations around the country. I think law enforcement has made contingency plans. I should point out that the threats can come from both sides. After all, it's Donald Trump who has survived 2 assassination attempts in recent months. So undoubtedly, some of his more extreme supporters may not accept the result if Harris is declared the winner in a very tight contest. On the other hand, there are also people on the left who also don't want to accept Trump becoming president. They view him as illegitimate. And it's not just the 2 people who tried to assassinate Trump. So there is a danger of violence. America is incredibly divided. But I hope that Americans will realize that what unites them is more important than what divides them. But on the other hand, it could literally be too close to call in that there'll have to be recounts and so on. So there could be a period of great uncertainty, as there have been in past elections. If your older viewers remember back in 24 years ago when Bush in the first election beat Al Gore, they had to have recounts in Florida for a long time before Bush was declared the winner. And there have been other cases too. So we could have something like that again, but let's hope it doesn't resort into violence. And it's not just bad for America. Whether we like it or not, America's the most important country in the world. And those of us, such as myself, that believe that for all its faults, America is still, if America is a world leader, then, I don't know, Russia, China, Iran, or some less democratic country, we want the best for America because the world has a stake in this election too.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your insight and time.